Conventional wisdom tells us that if we want to be faster, then we need to be aerodynamic, ride a more aggressive position, use a bike with skinny tyres and lightweight components. But these kinds of setups are not always conducive to comfort. And since riding the ridiculous Tour de Station Ultimate 1000 earlier in the year, I've started to wonder, at what point does comfortable become faster? Because during that ride, I experienced extreme pain and discomfort, which I feel impacted my performance on the bike. So to find out more, I arranged a chat with Professor Lex Mauger from the University of Kent. Lex is a professor in applied physiology, and his main area of research is the role of exercise-induced pain in fatigue and endurance performance, making him an ideal person to chat to about this and find out more. Oh, and his nickname is the Professor of Pain. Cool. Yeah, thanks for agreeing to talk to us, Lex. First thing I need to ask is, does pain reduce performance? And if so, why do we think that is?
Sure. So in my view, the short answer is yeah, I do think that pain impacts our performance, and there's good evidence to support that view as well. The reason for why it impacts our performance is twofold, really. So first of all, there's a physiological or a neurophysiological impact on our bodies when we experience pain. So this physiological impact acts on the corticospinal pathway. So it changes the type of muscle that we recruit when we exercise, and that has implications for our performance of that exercise. So, for example, when we're experiencing pain, we have a lower recruitment threshold for our fatigable fast twitch muscle fibers, whereas our recruitment threshold for our slow twitch fibers is increased. So ultimately what that means is, if we're sustaining a kind of a steady pace, a steady intensity, we might preferentially, or we might recruit more or a greater proportion of our fatigable fast twitch fibers and a lower proportion of our type 1 fatigue resistant fibers. So that means at that particular intensity, we're going to fatigue quicker because we're using a muscle type, or using more of a muscle type, which is more fatigue prone. We're less able to use oxygen with those types of muscle fiber. So that's one kind of neurophysiological factor. Another is that when we experience pain, we get a level of inhibition at the spinal level, which basically means that the message that our brains are sending to our muscles to contract the muscle gets inhibited at a spinal level. So that means our brain basically has to work harder in order to contract the muscle at the same intensity. And that can have kind of two effects. So the first effect is that might lead to an increased level of what we call central fatigue, so that fatigue of the corticospinal tract. But secondly, also, because the brain is basically having to send a greater central drive to the muscle, that can also have a secondary impact on our perception of effort as well. So for the same power output that we produce, our perception of effort is going to increase. And we know that for a given intensity, if our perception of effort increases, then our task performance is going to be reduced as well. There are other things as well. So it's, that pain might also change the recruitment patterns at a joint as well. So we might change the order in which those muscles are recruited, or a greater portion of one muscle in comparison to another, and that might very subtly change how we contract about that joint, which ultimately might be less efficient too. So there's a physiological impact of that pain, but also there's a psychological impact as well. So pain is an unpleasant sensation. It's not very nice to be in pain, for most of us at least, and so that unpleasantness leads to a kind of a less pleasurable time. Basically, that kind of impact on the kind of the hedonic and the kind of motivational aspects of the exercise. So we have less motivation to continue the task because that task is painful and not very pleasurable. And the other thing is that that pain, the body recognizes pain as a warning sensation, as a threat to the body. So that threat is responded to by inducing a psychological drive state to try and avoid that pain. So, we will be motivated to try and stop that pain from happening or to try and reduce the pain. So in the context of exercise, one of the main reasons that we're experiencing that pain is because we're pushing ourselves really hard. So the psychological drive to avoid the pain is to reduce us from pushing as hard, is to reduce the exercise intensity. So in the context of exercise performance, that is obviously a negative thing, because if we don't push ourselves as hard, then our power output is going to be less and our performance is going to be worse.
What you're largely talking out there is exercise induced pain, like people when you started to breathe really hard and you feel that sort of burn in your muscles, that kind of thing, or like a stitch or whatever. But what about within the context of, say, pain that you might experience through, I would say it was also exercise induced, but it's not exercise induced through like the cardiovascular system. So stuff like if your saddle is horrible and you've got a massive saddle sore and you're in pain because of that, how does that differ from the sort of cardiovascular thing?
The other type of pain, as you've alluded to on that one, is a kind of pain associated with doing the exercise, which might not cause a long-term injury, but is nonetheless not very pleasant and might impact the exercise task. So that might be a blister, it might be a saddle sore, it might be the palms of your hands kind of aching on the handlebars. That type of pain might not be to the same kind of intensity that we feel with an injury or exercise-induced pain, which can kind of get excruciating. But those types of pain, those kind of niggles, if you like, they might be small, but they're often occur in kind of exercise tasks which continue for a long period of time. And I guess the kind of key point here is that we can tolerate and endure a huge amount of pain if the duration of that is quite finite. If it's just like a 5-minute task, you can really kind of crack on, push on and endure, because you're just going to have to withstand it for 5 minutes. But if you've got a little kind of painful niggle, 5 minutes of that, you probably wouldn't even pay it a second thought. But if you have to endure that for several hours, that can get quite debilitating, and it potentially can change the way that we approach that task or how we behave during that task. So if you think about, if you kind of, you bruise your finger or, you've got a sore foot or something, and what you do in your everyday tasks, you guard yourself a bit. Yeah. So you're not kind of, you might change how you hold your pen or how you pick up your coffee cup. If you're walking with a sore foot, you might have, very slightly favor the foot, which isn't painful, and that's going to change how you walk. So, if you've got a bad back, you probably sit slightly differently. Yeah. And you might not necessarily notice that unless you really kind of focus on what that is doing to you. You just do it kind of, subconsciously. If you focus on it, you might become aware of it. But if you don't focus on it, you just do that because that's part of your kind of, your subconscious behavior. So if you take that in the context of, of exercise, if you've got sore hands, you're probably shifting your hands a bit on the handlebars a bit more. If you've got a sore foot, probably your pedal strokes aren't going to be quite as efficient. You probably haven't got quite such an even distribution between the 2 feet. If you've got saddle sore, you're probably shifting your weight on the saddle a bit. And, whilst that might not have a huge impact on a 5-minute exercise task, if you're sat on that bike for several hours, all of those shifts in posture, all of that kind of slight change in efficiency from turning the pedals is probably going to have an impact on your performance.
And I guess pain is quite individual as well. What's the typical sort of spectrum? I'm guessing that has been quantified, or people have attempted to quantify it in terms of pain thresholds for different people. Are some people a lot better at dealing with it than others?
Yeah, so I guess it's helpful here to kind of distinguish between what we call pain threshold and pain tolerance. So pain threshold is the kind of the lowest level of stimulus which elicits a painful sensation. So, if you've got, if you apply pressure, for example, to a part of the body, I'm just experiencing that sensation as touch at the moment. But if I keep applying pressure, there will be a level of pressure which I apply where that sensation changes from touch into pain. And that is your pain threshold. Now, if you compare athletes and non-athletes, there is actually very limited evidence to show that there is a difference in pain threshold between athletes and non-athletes. Okay, or between sports. The other thing then is pain tolerance. So pain tolerance is either the maximum amount of pain that you can endure, or it's the level or the amount of time that you can endure a given amount of pain. So if I was to apply, pressure with this pen to my palm so that it was painful, and then I have to endure that pain for, as long as I can, that would be my, the length of time that I could do that would be my pain tolerance. And there is some good evidence to show that athletes have a higher pain tolerance than non-athletes.
So that leads nicely onto like the next thing then that I want to ask, which is, it sounds by what you're saying that it's possible to train the mind to deal better with pain and discomfort. Can you hack your brain to mitigate the effects of pain? What can you do to do that?
So I guess again, the short answer to this is yes. There are ways in which you can deal with the pain in order to kind of mitigate its effects or its possible effects on the performance. So one of the ways in which you can do that is by taking a painkiller, for example. And I guess the recent hot topic on this is that tramadol is being banned from January 2024 in sporting competition. So WADA have added tramadol to the prohibited list. The reason for that is that firstly, tramadol poses a risk to the athlete. It's a very potent analgesic. It's addictive. Prolonged use can cause depression, risk of suicide, it's a high risk of overdose. But also, we've recently produced some compelling evidence to show that tramadol is performance enhancing. So taking tramadol prior to a competition, prior to a cycling task, improve the cyclist's performance of that task. Some of my early work and others' work has shown that even perhaps kind of more innocent kind of low-key analgesics, so paracetamol, for example, a very common over-the-counter drug, can enhance performance as well. We can reduce the pain that we experience by taking a substance which basically reduces the pain. The ethics and the safety of that, I think, are can be very strongly questioned, and indeed some of those analgesics are banned by competition regulators. But the evidence, the scientific evidence, suggests that they can be performance enhancing. But there are other ways in which we might be able to reduce that pain, and that athletes and others do, which perhaps don't have the side effects, don't pose the same kind of risks to athlete health, and aren't banned as well in competition. So, some of those things will be psychological strategies. So, association and dissociation is one which has received quite a lot of attention. So dissociating from a task is basically engaging your mind in things other than the task you were doing. So if something hurts, if you're riding and you're experiencing pain, maybe you listen to music, maybe you'll count the trees as you go past, maybe you'll have a chat to the person next to you. So it's kind of taking your mind away from that. And we know very well from lots of other pain literature that if you distract someone from the pain, then because you're not focusing on it, that pain is reduced. So dissociation might partly work. Association is the opposite. It's kind of focusing in on what you're doing and kind of accepting the experience that your body is telling you. So that might be kind of thinking about the pain that you're experiencing, why you're experiencing it, kind of thinking about what impact that might have. And again, in the context of exercise-induced pain, that could be a positive strategy, because if you're experiencing that pain during exercise, how you think about that and how you try and deal with it could lead to a thinking, well, this pain means I'm working hard. Yeah, that's a good thing. I'm working hard, and that's positive. I know this pain isn't causing me damage. It's not like an injury pain, so it doesn't matter that I'm experiencing this. This is part of why I'm competing, because this is part of a kind of, the challenge of doing this. So the interesting thing, some studies which were done quite a few years ago now, were that kind of looking at who uses those associative and dissociative strategies, and actually the higher level athletes tended to use association as a way of coping in comparison to dissociation. So actually kind of engaging with how they're feeling during that exercise task, and kind of trying to process that information and use it to their advantage, rather than trying to kind of distract themselves from what they're experiencing during the exercise.
It must be where I've been going wrong all those years, Lex. I start trying to think about other things. I think I find myself doing maths just sort of doing mental arithmetic and looking at my head unit and then working out numbers from, just doing little calculations in my head. But
well,
yeah.
Joking like me, you find maths painful in itself, so I'll probably get a double whammy from that one. But
but that's interesting. So you say a superior strategy is probably to try and just embrace the pain and start being positive about it, and it's
well, whether it's superior or not, I mean, I wouldn't be able to comment on that necessarily, but some of the evidence from the past studies suggests that the kind of the higher level athletes tend to be associative thinkers rather than kind of that dissociation and that kind of distraction technique.
I mean, one of your students is Chris Fennell, who's a very high level cyclist and has done a lot of endurance things. And when cyclists are often taking on events, and Chris is someone who does time trials and things like that, there is often this swing towards choosing the equipment which is the most aerodynamic and the fastest, and these things seem to take much greater priority over choosing things which are comfortable. But I'd be interested to know what your take is on that, and should cyclists be thinking more about trying to be as comfortable as possible?
I mean, I guess my cop-out will probably be to say that it depends, first of all. And maybe I'll go back to my, my earlier point, whereby I say that, you can tolerate a huge amount of pain if it's for a relatively short period of time. So, you can continue moving your body in an efficient, ergonomic way, despite experiencing pain, if you're doing that for a refined period of time. So if that's a 10-mile time trial, or even an hour time trial, for example, you can probably tolerate huge amounts of pain and not change how you're moving if you're kind of well practiced in doing that. But if you're experiencing even a lower level of pain and you have to do that for an ultra event, for example, you've got to be some kind of person to be able to, basically endure and tolerate that kind of discomfort for that period of time and not change what you're doing. So I guess in terms of, kind of an aggressive setup on your bike, for example, if you were able to complete that task without that discomfort that you're experiencing having a negative impact on the task, then yeah, sure, go for that aggressive setup, because your tolerance of the discomfort that you're experiencing probably you can tolerate that, so you may as well go for the aggressive setup because it's going to make you faster. But I think then what you need to start weighing up is that if the discomfort that you're experiencing begins to change how you move and how you approach the task, you need to find that kind of balance between maybe the fastest setup that you have, which is offset the least amount by the discomfort that you're going to experience. And it might be that if you have a really aggressive setup, but that you're going to experience loads of pain and loads of discomfort over a prolonged period of time, then that discomfort is going to outweigh how fast your setup is. And actually probably what you're better off doing is making yourself a little bit more comfortable, because doing so is going to change how you're moving less, and therefore your performance is going to be that much better.
I guess the frustrating thing with that is, for a lot of people, the only way you can determine that is through trial and error.
Absolutely, yeah. Comfort is dynamic. What is comfortable for 5 minutes might not be comfortable for 5 hours. And you're only really going to know what's comfortable over 5 hours by testing it out, and that might be kind of more or less plausible depending on what that event is. It's very difficult to kind of if you're doing a 24-hour race, to test how something feels over 24 hours and actually really see kind of what the best setup and things are. But some of these things, like not doing anything totally new before you start a competition, using gear and using equipment and setups that are tried and tested over a longer period of time, trying to kind of get as close to the experience of that competition as you can, because it's not just the distance and it's not just the intensity, but it's also the context in which you're doing these as well. The weather conditions are always going to be important. It's going to be very difficult to kind of recreate exactly the conditions of that race or that competition, but you can try and get as close to that as you can. I mean, part of the other thing perhaps is it depends on what your outcome is. What are you looking to do? Are you looking to win, or are you looking to enjoy it and maybe do this again? One of my personal experiences of something like this is doing the marathon. And I wanted to do it as fast as possible. And I'm not a highly trained runner by any stretch, but I really wanted to get the best time that I could when I did the marathon. And I hated it. I absolutely hated the whole thing because it was so incredibly painful. So much so that I didn't want to go anywhere near running for several months and years afterwards. I wasn't going to win. Why was I so motivated and getting a personal best? Maybe what I should have done is set myself up to enjoy the occasion, because actually the long-term strategy for me might have been I would have carried on running for months and years after that if I'd actually kind of enjoyed it. And I would have enjoyed it if I was more comfortable in doing so.
I think that's a good point to sort of end on. In that basically comfort's underrated. I think is a lot of people could make themselves probably a lot more comfortable at the expense of maybe a bit of speed, but it might make you faster overall. Yeah, which is not conventional thinking, I don't think. But yeah, been fascinating talking to you, Lex. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Ollie.
Big thanks to Lex for his time. I hope you found this discussion interesting. I think the topic of how the brain interacts with the body is truly fascinating. And this, combined with my own experiences of doing long rides, is certainly making me think more about making my setup more comfortable in future rides I'm going to do. So let us know your thoughts on this down in the comments below. And if you like this kind of content and you'd like to see more of it, then please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. I'm going to go now. Love you. Bye.